There's no lack of media critics who will repeat what has become a piece of conventional wisdom. That roughly every 10 years, Hollywood will release a new Robin Hood movie. This year, 2021, was the 30th anniversary of Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, starring Kevin Costner and Alan Rickman. Over those past 30 years, we've also seen Russell Crowe and Taron Egerton take their turns behind the bow. That's 3 decades and 3 movies. So, assuming you don't count parody films like Men in Tights or films that don't have large theatrical releases, then the truism seems to hold. Personally, I prefer to see more data points than that, and it's a model that would require more finessing when you look at other eras in Hollywood history. For instance, the film we're looking at for this episode, Rogues of Sherwood Forest, came out in 1950, right in the middle of a period in the 40s and 50s when filmgoers could see a new Robin Hood film every 2 years. Now, granted, most of these films were not lavish productions with the biggest stars, nor were they wild successes. These were the sorts of films attempting to cash in on the cultural familiarity of Robin Hood still in audiences' minds from 1938's The Adventures of Robin Hood, which was still getting replayed in theaters with some regularity. And while none of them are exactly sequels or part of a franchise as we would think of that today, they are evidence of how much audiences were expected to already be familiar with the legends of Robin Hood. In some of the films, Robin Hood is an old man, or in the case of this film, already dead before it begins. But there are never flashbacks, or much in the way of discussion regarding his past exploits. Even in The Prince of Thieves with John Hall from 1948, it was just taken as rote that Robin Hood was an outlaw living in the woods with his band of merry men. How or why they became outlaws is never addressed. The first notable attempt to really retell the story of Robin Hood would come in 1952 from Walt Disney. But we'll get into that for the next episode of Splitting Arrows. First, Rick and I are going to sit down with the writer, podcaster, all-around Renaissance man, and genuinely wonderful human being, Andy Fix, to see how John Derek fares in his first starring role as Robin Hood Jr. in Rogues of Sherwood Forest from 1950. I suppose we can go ahead and get started since we have a whole movie to watch.
Yeah.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Splitting Arrows. This will be the second in our sub-series of movies that feature the child of Robin Hood. Tonight's film is The Rogues of Sherwood Forest, starring John Derek as Robin, Earl of Huntington, Diane Lynn as Lady Marianne, George McReady as King John, and for his third appearance as Little John, Alan Hale. Trying to look up trivia and information about this movie, very little came up except for the fact that Alan Hale appears in it as Little John. This is, as I said, his return. He first appeared as Little John in 1922 opposite Douglas Fairbanks, and then reappeared as Little John for the 1938 Adventures of Robin Hood with Errol Flynn. So he has 2 really notable credits as Little John already. And
this.
Yeah, and then this one. This was 28 years after his first appearance as Little John. And for decades and decades, this was the record for the longest stint anyone had of playing the same role in films. Nowadays, however, that's completely blown out of the water. In our modern film franchise sort of cinematic environment, somebody going for decades playing the same role is pretty common. You look at Mark Hamill, who first played Luke Skywalker in 1977, and then played Luke Skywalker in Rise of Skywalker just a couple of years ago. And then even more recently, if you count his work on The Mandalorian.
He was actually on set for it, even though it wasn't his body doing the acting, yeah.
And we've got another Indiana Jones movie in the works right now. We've had Rocky Balboa, a few years ago. It's common now for actors to be reprising these roles and carrying out these franchises for years and years after they started. But that wasn't common back in 1950 and even long afterwards. And so that's why it's so notable that Alan Hale is reprising his role as Little John, even though this isn't really a franchise in that same sort of ways. There's nothing that really directly connects this movie with the earlier ones that he appeared in. The first time he played Little John really has nothing to do with the second time he played Little John. We'll see if there's any connections between this film and the other ones, but certainly nothing that the cast list would suggest.
Andy, how versed are you in Robin Hood movies?
I am not terribly versed in the Robin Hood movies outside of the Errol Flynn one and then the modern versions. I'm pretty well versed in Robin Hood lore, but I just haven't watched a lot of the older Robin Hood movies, like the one we're watching tonight. I did, after listening to the first Splitting Arrows, I did go back and watch the silent Robin Hood movie that you guys did, and absolutely loved it. So I'm excited to get into this one.
Yeah, it's a really fun one, and we did vote Alan Hale as the merriest man out of that film.
Yeah.
We'll see. He didn't earn it for his second appearance as Little John. We'll see how he does this time.
To be fair, in the second appearance, he was just kind of, he was outshined.
Yeah,
he was. He did an admirable job, but there wasn't anything special enough to earn him that meritorious award. And having kind of run through the cast list, let's see, it was directed by Gordon Douglas, screenplay by George Bruce, based on a script by Ralph Gilbert Bettison. I basically have nothing else to say about the movie. I'm curious to see if we'll have a much better representation for that idea of the child of Robin Hood. We were unimpressed by Robin Hood's scion in The Bandit of Sherwood Forest that came out 4 years before this film. So I'm hoping we'll get a better take on that sort of notion this time.
So is this movie a sequel to that one?
Definitely not.
Okay.
It's got a different cast list. This one even chronologically would take place earlier because King John appears to be the antagonist in this film, played by George McCready, whereas in The Bandit of Sherwood Forest, John was already dead, and it was about his son Henry III as a child and William of Pembroke being the regent that represented the kind of royal conflict that Robin and his son were getting involved in. So this would be something earlier. I'm going to guess, based on one thing that I read earlier and just kind of a notion of when this is taking place, that we're going to see Magna Carta referenced in this one too.
Cool.
Which was also a plot point in the Bandit of Sherwood Forest too, about the idea of it being revoked.
Which, by the way, don't watch that one. I don't know how far you are into the Splitting Arrows segments that we do.
I haven't reached that episode yet. No.
So far, there has not been a multi-movie Robin Hood franchise as we would kind of think of it amongst the movies that we've done so far. There's just nothing. And I don't know if there's ever really one.
Certainly not modern day, outside of the TV shows.
Yeah, they keep trying. The new Robin Hood movies, like the one with Egerton, I can't remember his full name.
Aaron Egerton.
And I think they were trying with that one, but it just didn't make it.
That was definitely intended to be this launch of a franchise. I think there was something like 5 or 7 movies planned, but it had such a terrible reception and was such a bomb in the box office that nothing happened with that.
Everybody wants to get the next big franchise. Like these days that's kind of the thing. Remember when Harry Potter was big, there was like, oh, let's try and get that with Percy Jackson or this other thing. And Of course, now you're seeing it with, the MCU, which is at nearly 30 movies at this point. It's ridiculous. Everybody wants that kind of thing. And I doubt Robin Hood is going to be the property that does that. But hey, you never know.
In episode 4 of the podcast, I interviewed Stephen A. McKay, and he's got his Forest Lord series, which is about Robin Hood. That would actually be pretty ripe for a cinematic universe, because he actually expands out and has several novellas and short stories that feature other characters. Sir Richard of the Lee, who's kind of a minor character, but an early one that appears in Robin Hood novels, has his own set of adventures. He's got a whole series of novellas featuring Friar Tuck solving mysteries. So the material
like
could be
Cadfael
there.
style?
Yeah, like
Could be
Cadfael.
done.
That'd be awesome. Totally watch that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Robin Hood's an enduring enough character and free to use. So we'll see. It might still happen yet.
You got to get good script writers, though.
Yeah, that last movie was so bad. The last big screen adaptation that came out a couple years ago was terrible.
It was pretty rough. We'll get to that one in this series eventually. We still have our kind of rough films from the late 40s and early 50s to get through first, though.
Of which there are a surprising number.
Yeah.
When you get to that one, Thad, I'll be sick that day, so don't call.
All right. Well, thanks for not being sick for this one, because we have no idea what we're getting into with the Rogues of Sherwood Forest, because none of us have seen this one before.
Oh, cool.
It doesn't even have ratings on RottenTomatoes.com. Like, not even audience ratings or professional ratings.
Wow, that doesn't bode well.
No.
Yeah.
Well, I did see one rating. The Wikipedia article has a 1-sentence blurb from Leonard Maltin, which is I don't want to poison the well. I don't want to poison.
Yeah, we'll go in clear and poison the well. So yeah, that builds confidence for what we're in for.
He doesn't actually say it's bad. So there's at least that.
All right, Leonard Maltin doesn't say the movie is bad. Let's hang our hats on that one.
It didn't make me walk out of the theater, Sure,
I've seen enough films where I have walked out of the theater, or at least wanted to, so that is at least saying something, I guess. The film can be found on DVD. This is something I probably should have mentioned in an earlier episode. There is a DVD set called Robin Hood Origins that can be found online pretty easily, and it contains 5 movies, 4 Robin Hood films, including the previous 2 Splitting Arrow episodes that we've done, Prince of Thieves from 1948 and the aforementioned The Bandit of Sherwood Forest from 1946. It also includes this film and The Sword of Sherwood Forest starring Richard Green, which will be in an upcoming Splitting Arrows episode. There's a 5th movie that's called The Black Arrow, based on a Robert Louis Stevenson story, which actually has nothing to do with Robin Hood, but has enough of the kind of similar pastiche and feel that somebody tossed it in that DVD set. So if somebody would like to watch this film and some of the others from around this time period, that's a good source to seek out. The Robin Hood Origins DVD set. Certain major online retailers, who I'm not going to say by name, are likely to carry it. I suppose with us really having nothing else to say regarding our expectations for the film, we're going to pause our recording, watch the film, then we'll come back, give our thoughts. It will no longer be spoiler free. How's that sound?
I'm good.
Well, we are back from watching The Rogues of Sherwood Forest, and I suppose that was a movie. I kind of had to fight off falling asleep a few times.
It does drag a little. Yeah, it does drag a little, but I mean, overall, actually, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it quite a bit. I thought it had actually a fairly sophisticated plot, especially for a kind of nothing studio movie of the time. the plot of the king was actually a reasonably believable plot. I mean, they still don't understand what Magna Carta was, or on one level how feudalism kind of worked around taxes, but
Hey, look, the Magna Carta was signed and in the climax of the film, and then there was never injustice or problems in England again. I think ultimately I'm right up there with Leonard Maltin. And yeah, okay, I wouldn't have walked out of the theater, I guess.
I rather liked how they tied it into the historical signing of the Magna Carta, and I liked how Robin Hood was one of the barons that was at the signing, dressed in his knightly garb, no less. I thought that was kind of cool. So I mean,
agree.
I'm kind of in the middle. The movie was boring. The fight scenes were atrocious. The acting wasn't terribly good, but overall, I agree with Rich. The plot was pretty sophisticated for a Robin Hood movie.
Little bit of a different plot, had some similar beats, but was something different. And unlike the Bandit of Sherwood Forest that also used the Magna Carta as a plot point, it did something that was totally anti-historical with having William Marshall revoking Magna Carta instead of reissuing it, which is what actually happened in history. Whereas this was all a build-up to King John signing and or stamping it really with his seal and there at Runnymede, so at least tied into actual history with the barons uniting against him, having these list of grievances against him. You're right, that was clever, and while not directly historical, really did build off of real history and incorporated real history.
And that last scene there was really cool because I've seen paintings that people have done of the signing of the Magna Carta, and that last scene there looked like it was one of those paintings brought to life.
I think that was definitely intentional. I mean, I think they probably looked at those paintings and said, okay, let's recreate that at least in spirit and everything.
In that vein of it looking good there at the end, I would say in general the movie looked good. It wasn't the highest quality sets ever, but it was beautiful Technicolor and some very nice costumes. It looked pretty decent.
The costumes were really quite good and fairly little recycling from previous Robin Hood movies. I noted while we were watching. There was one or two spots and even some recycled footage. It starts off a little it's not the strongest start, but it's not the worst start. But the actual the plot of King John to seize power from the barons using Flemish troops, but then he can't pay for it, so the whole plot to bring these rich barons in and then gack them and then seize their property as property, that was a proper evil plot. That was actually a pretty solidly believable
and entirely believable considering the politics of the time.
Yeah,
I thought it was
that John was unfairly taxing the barons. He was seizing their property. That was a real thing that was leading to the grievances the barons had for wanting to get the Magna Carta Charter created and sealed by John. So yeah, that is.
It wasn't for the rights of the women and the peasants.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, unlike what the movie portrays, where it was about rights for all and equality for women and every person.
It's not Magna Carta. Well, and they literally talked about the democratic bent of King Richard. I'm like, you're talking about a Plantagenet king. First of all, democracy didn't exist as a word or a concept in England at that point.
Yeah,
but
they actually said the democratic reign of Richard.
Right.
I had to write that one down because that was hilarious.
I was literally just I did a double take. I'm just like, what? The democratic reign of an absolute monarch that didn't even have a parliament.
It was a very Americanized version of English history.
It is. And like you were saying, they did hit a few historical notes. And I liked that, I don't actually think I fully agree with Leonard Maltin on this, who said it was, despite having a good cast, was limp. I don't think it was limp. I do think it was a little bit Yeah, there was definitely 1 or 2 points where I checked how much longer there was in the movie. Um,
I felt it was pretty limp, and I'll get to some reasons why in the low points.
yeah, but overall, I did think it was an enjoyable watch, and a lot of that actually comes from, what was it, about half an hour into the movie or whatever. They have a whole getting the band back together sequence, and that was really good. Like, I
Yeah.
That was
really enjoyed
definitely the highlight. That part was good.
Any part that had the merry men just goofing off and cracking jokes was good. Little
Yeah.
John, I
Mhm.
wasn't terribly impressed with Little John. He looked his age, but the other guys were all pretty good. Friar Tuck was a hoot.
If
Fire-
anything, he looked older than his age. So, at a
Yeah.
guess, how old would you suppose Alan Hale was when he played this role?
I'd say he was probably in his late 60s, early 70s.
That's about where I'd go.
He was 57.
Holy crap!
Dang, he did not. He lived a hard life, apparently.
Dude.
Well, and now, very very tragically, he died very shortly after the completion of this film. He had liver ailments that then became complicated by a viral infection and passed away the same year that this film came out. He was definitely looking a good bit past his age in
Yeah.
the film.
He was the Wilford Brimley of his time.
Well, liver will do that to you. Liver will age you. But I will say, like, genuinely, I feel like this movie might have had the most personality development on the Merry Men of the ones we've watched. Each one felt like a fully developed character with a personality. Little John kind of being the weak one in that, because he's the sidekick from the beginning, and you're kind of meant to know he's he's Little John, so you kind of meant to know his personality. But he does have a certain level of that boisterousness and that largeness of personality that Alan Hale was bringing to the part as best to his ability.
Oh yeah.
Friar Tuck was fantastic. I loved Friar Tuck. He's this, he's very charming, this very gregarious, wordy, cheeky. Oh, so cheeky.
Yeah.
Alan Hale is a rake.
Yeah.
He was very rakish and a good singer. Like, we got a full song from him. It was nice. I loved the Merry Men singing Derry Down together.
Yeah.
Like you were saying, Andy, the bits with the Merry Men together, especially early on as they were kind of coalescing again, those were the high points of the film. Very quality, very fun. Some good kind of banteriness between them that felt very genuine. They felt like these were actually people who hadn't seen each other for a long time and were very happy to be seeing one another again. It felt like friends reuniting.
Exactly.
Yeah, that was absolutely my favorite part of the whole movie. And it wasn't that it was necessarily an immediate afterwards, but it did coast a bit. But you did get those little perk ups where you get these little scenes where the Merry Men are interacting, and they're all really good. They don't actually even feel forced. They don't feel jammed in. They tend to be very brief, but just enough to kind of perk the movie back up a little bit. We also even have Will Scarlet getting some nice development, and the actor there did a good job playing this kind of roguish poacher type. Yeah, no, it was actually, the Merry Men flat out one of my favorite parts of that movie.
Now, in the previous film, in this subset of Child of Robin Hood, we did have Robin Hood himself, the elder statesman Robin Hood, who denounces his role as Earl of Huntington in order to go back to his life of being a bandit in Sherwood and get the Merry Men together. And then he's kind of working on the side as his son is in the limelight during that film. In this film, Robin Hood is just gone. He's dead, one presumes. They never mention what happens to him. He's only talked about in the past tense. And his son is just there fulfilling the role. He's already present. He's already taken on the responsibilities of the Earl of Huntington. And he even just starts going by Robin in the film. So the son of Robin Hood is just the Robin Hood of this movie. And he was fine. He wasn't off-putting like the Robert of Huntington that was played by Cornel Wilde in The Bandit of Sherwood Forest. You know, I liked him well enough, but he also wasn't terribly exciting or dynamic. He didn't have a great screen presence, and he didn't have the chemistry with the Merry Men that the Merry Men had with one another.
How often is it that Robin Hood is the dullest character in the Robin Hood movie?
Seriously, he you know, I could tell that the actor was trying. You know, that is one thing over Cornel Wilde, where I could tell this actor was trying to bring emotion in scene. Like when he, at the beginning, when he has this kind of awkward confrontation with Marianne, he was genuinely, you know, you got the emotion off of him, that he was like kind of ticked off and everything. And later on, you know, you got the emotions off of him, which is definitely better than, like I said, than Cornel Wilde or the guy from the last movie.
John Hall, I believe.
Yeah, John Hall. This guy did emote. He wasn't a strong actor. He really wasn't, but he was trying. He just kind of lacked real charisma, like that easy charisma like Errol Flynn has, or even Douglas Fairbanks has. Just didn't quite have it. Like it would have been nice to have that presence.
I think he was also hurt by a weak script. There weren't any like good memorable lines that he had at any particular point.
Right.
Yeah. There was no banter between him and the king except in one scene, and just no real zingers came out of that. Not really.
I feel like we can be forgiving almost a little bit of Robin Hood being weak because there's almost an out with this not even having been the real Robin Hood. It was his son. It was the also ran. You know, the real Robin Hood we didn't even get to see because he wasn't in the movie.
He cut a pretty heroic figure. I mean, he had the physique for it, and he did all right with the, you know, with the actiony bits, but he did. I agree. He just didn't have the script. He didn't have the lines or the banter or any of that stuff. I mean, he had a couple little bits, but you know, when I was taking notes, all the good lines went to the Merry Men, or even King John had one of the funnier lines too. So
he didn't have any good romantic lines either.
Right.
The romance between him and the Lady Marianne was nowhere near as just awful as the similar romance that occurred in The Bandit of Sherwood Forest with the son of Robin Hood there. You'll have to listen to that episode because we go into some length about how awful it is.
I have to track down this movie now. I
have to give a content.
Don't track it
down. Of that episode.
Don't track it down. Don't bother.
It is on that DVD set that I mentioned earlier. Yeah, that romance was terrible. The one in this movie it's
okay.
Not offensive.
Yeah.
But there's nothing, there's no strong chemistry, there's no good romantic lines. You know, you don't see either character really looking that wistfully at one another. They kiss at the end and it's like, okay, I guess they're going to kiss because she's the only woman in the movie. He's the lead.
Seriously, this movie fails the Bechdel test hard. There's literally, I think there's only 2 speaking female parts, and one of them is a random peasant woman in the forest who's her and her husband find a dying lord. Like those are, oh no, wait. There are like a couple of maidens at the beginning, like the one with Alan Hale and the one who passes Will Scarlet. But
that's true. There's the women that Alan Hale is trying to make time with.
Yeah, but she is the only major speaking female part in this entire movie. The thing about it is like, the romance there, it's not offensive, but it doesn't actually make a whole lot of sense because they have next to no actual conversations with one another.
Right. The most romantic scene in the whole movie was at the very beginning when he asked for her favor during the joust.
Yeah.
And the second most romantic is when he sells her some homing pigeons.
And keep in mind that him asking her for her favor, it is actually established in the dialogue that they have later that is the first time they've ever spoken.
Oh yeah.
You know,
yeah, so no, they have almost no scenes where they really speak together and establish any sort of rapport.
Yeah. The only thing I can think of is she fell in love with him for his efforts, seeing that he's putting all this hard work into save England from a jerk.
That was clearly the scene where she fell in love with him when he was
Yes.
being interrogated in the castle.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And it seemed like she felt guilty because early on there was this plot to kill him right at the very beginning of the movie. King John tries to kill him with a faked accident in a tournament, and he thinks that she is aware of this plot. After he goes and gets the favor, and he returns the favor to her, thinking that she had been aware of this, and I think she then feels guilty that he would have thought that, which is why she helps him escape from his dungeon cell later. And that seemed to be the kind of start of things between them.
Yeah, she risks to go save him. Yeah, I think maybe it's out of a sense of attraction, maybe it's out of just a sense of he's wrongfully imprisoned. She seemed to have a genuine sense of justice and right and wrong. She did not like her keeper and King John. She did not really like being his ward. But at the same time, she does use her position in court to help Robin and the Merry Men and everything without question. She just, she's like, oh yeah, no, I'm down with it.
She had a lot of agency. I mean, she's the one that came up with the plan to free Robin and followed through with it. I thought that was pretty impressive. She didn't have any help there. And then she figured out on her own what she was supposed to do with those pigeons. I mean, Robin gave her a little bit of a hint, but she grabbed hold of that real quick and figured out what she needed to do and what information he was looking for. I think that she was definitely a strong character.
She was. The lone female character, but a good one.
I've noticed that this tends to be not an unusual trope in the Robin Hood movies that we watched. The primary female protagonist having some agency and being, if not fundamental or key, a part of the overall plans around Robin Hood and his continued success and everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I would agree. And one thing I actually appreciated is that there was never a scene where she really needed to be rescued. It seemed like they were building to that at one point when the evil Sir Giles seemed to be catching her sending the messages, but she figures out how to get out of that on her own without really being caught. Then she's being forced to marry the Count from Flanders, but that's all just gets set up for Robin and the Merrymen to have an ambush. It's not really about rescuing her at any point. Not really.
Yeah, she was never the damsel in distress at any point in this movie. Never tied to a chair, never, locked away in a tower. Even when she backtalks John, when he comes to tell her, oh, you're going to get married to this Flemish dude. And she tells him flat out, yeah, no, I don't like you. I don't like him. I don't like Giles. All y'all are kind of dicks and I hate you. She's not locked in a tower. She's not made to have to be rescued or anything like that. I mean, there's kind of this idea that she needs to be rescued from this forced marriage, but even that's not a urgent, oh, she's being married in the morning or anything like that. And she even still has agency in that because she sent this note of, oh, asked to be married in St. Dunstan's Abbey. We'll take care
I think that was Robin's. That part was Robin's ploy.
It was Robin's ploy, but she's the one who actually made it happen. We don't see that scene with John.
Right.
But she still has the agency enough to make that part of the plan happen.
Yes. We instead get John complaining about her having made it happen.
Right. Yeah. And the Flemish guy made a point where it was actually realistic that she was able to convince John too. So
yeah. No, that part worked. She was definitely one of the stronger characters. All right. So getting on with our list of questions, I think we've pretty well established how it compared to our expectations and how it felt in regards to the depictions of the main characters. What would you consider the most impressive feat of archery in the film?
There really wasn't.
There wasn't a lot of archery. I mean, there was a lot of arrow shooting, but nothing that was like trick archery, except for close to the beginning when Robin Hood cut the noose for the first guy that was being hanged from the tree. When he shot the arrow to cut that noose, that was pretty impressive.
That's also what I would pick. We did see a lot of arrows being shot. We saw a lot of people being killed with arrows. But the only, like, this feels like an impressive feat, other than him shooting some people while riding on horseback, because that is an impressive thing, would be that moment with the rope getting shot while the person is about to be hanged. And that was definitely an example of recycled footage from The Bandit of Sherwood, where Cornell Wilde's Robert of Huntington does the exact same thing, then rides up and grabs the person. And what I noticed is, because they were recycling so heavily from that kind of montage early in that movie, they had to put John Derek in the same costume that Cornell Wilde wore, just so they could get away with all that recycled footage.
That's funny. I will say the second most impressive archery feat was the gentleman that shot down the pigeon at night.
Oh, that's what I was going to pick.
I'm sorry.
To pick that. No, it's fine. Yeah. Like I was going to say, actually, most impressive feat for me was shooting a bird out of mid-flight with a windlass crossbow. Like
that's true.
That's actually way more impressive than shooting a noose out within the movie perspective. Using a longbow from the back of a horse is pretty damn impressive.
Given that it's nigh impossible to actually do.
Right.
Yeah, that's pretty much impossible to actually do, because it's not a mounted weapon. Never has been. It wouldn't have been at the time.
No,
you would have used a short bow.
Yeah, that's their history is filled with horseback archers. You know, the Scythians, Mongolians, others. But they used much different bows. That's why the recurve bow was such an important bit of technology for them. You know, still get that power, but be much shorter. The longbow's not really a thing to use on horseback.
But if anybody could pull it off, it would be Robin Hood.
I mean, looking at the way they were treating those bows, those are probably like 20-pound draw, if that. I mean, because like, you literally see him in one scene where he's talking to the merry men. And you see him unstring his bow literally one-handed, just standing there, bends it down, pops the string off the notch, and like you can't do that with a proper longbow.
Right, I noticed that too.
Those things start at like 65-pound draws.
I missed that. And that's actually an interesting point, because you almost never see unstrung bows in these movies. Mm-hmm. You know, people just like bows seem to exist in a strung state most of the time, and not just Robin Hood movies, but any sort of historical time period film.
They actually, there were several points where I saw longbows unstrung. There were like little details like that, like little things here and there that were actually kind of interesting. Like when they're trying to escape from prison, and Marianne lowers them a saw, and they lubricate the saw with the wax from a candle to try and keep it quiet. And also because you should lubricate a saw that you're trying to saw through metal with. It's actually a nice little detail that they put in there. Because in a lot of movies, they would have just tried to saw them really quietly, and everything. And then the wax gives out and it gets the guards in there and everything. There were little pieces like that, like little tiny details here and there of pieces that sometimes they were part of the plot, sometimes they were just kind of something, and it was just
To circle back real quick to the use of the homing pigeon, it's the second time we've seen homing pigeons important for the plot, because that occurred also in the Douglas Fairbanks movie. But there was the much more realistic interception of the homing pigeon via a hunting hawk, as opposed to this one where, as you said, a darn impressive feat for somebody to just shoot the bird in mid-flight with the crossbow.
Yeah, that was actually what I was going to pick for the most impressive feat of archery, was a guy shooting a pigeon out. But yeah, no, it was weird, because I feel like this was a movie that if it had just a 10%, 20% better script, would have been just significantly would have improved things. Like it would have made up for some of the weak acting and everything. And here's the thing I will also say. We talked about the Merry Men and there's the strength of that acting and the interaction there, and the weakness of the main guy. I thought the villains were actually really well done. I liked the John. He was properly villainous. I mean, he's not Claude Rains, but he wasn't stilted. He wasn't wooden. He emoted. He carried the scenes. He had a lot of presence. He had reasonably good chemistry with the Count of Flanders and Sir Giles. The guy who played Sir Giles was I'll call him, a slightly discounted Basil Rathbone. Not as good as Basil Rathbone by any means, but serviceable in the part of lead King John henchman number 1. So yeah, I mean, I felt like the villains were actually really well portrayed and well done.
I agree.
I feel a little bit in the minority. I found them dull. I don't think they need to be scenery chewing crazies like the Sheriff of Nottingham in the Kevin Costner film, but I found them dry and dull. I didn't find their motivation strong. I didn't find their personalities strong. You mentioned Basil Rathbone as a point of comparison, and Basil Rathbone isn't crazy in scenery chewing, but he has a force of personality, and his desires and wants are so clearly emoted. And I felt a lot like they were kind of going through the motions, that they weren't badly acted, so that it wasn't ever like painful to see them on screen. But those were the parts that I felt dragged the most, is when we were just kind of hearing them politicking.
Well, I won't argue that. I think that's more a problem with the script, and I'm more talking about the performance. I thought the performances were pretty good. You are right. The script was very dry on them. Absolutely. But
yeah, I just didn't think the performances were strong enough to elevate them up beyond the script.
Not high enough. But I do feel they did elevate it a little bit, like 10%, a little bit. But for instance, when Giles is in the bedroom with Mary Ann, there's this kind of slight sense of dread. Not that he's an overly violent man or anything, but that he's very cunning, and he's very onto her.
Giles in particular I thought was good. I felt he was the strongest of our three. So our three real villains were Sir Giles, who seems to be kind of the lead henchman of King John himself, and the Count of Flanders. Those were really our three villains. And of them, I did feel Sir Giles was the strongest in terms of a villainous presence.
Yeah. Without being a direct threat, without bluster or anything. He pulled it off, I thought. Just he was let down by bad lines.
So how about best example of swashbuckling action?
I'm gonna pick actually towards the beginning, in the fight where they're fighting with the tax collectors. There's a scene where Robin is up on a balcony. He throws his sword to kill a guy who's about to get Little John, and he runs over across like a roof, grabs a rope or something, and then swings down into the soldiers. That was actually a really solid piece of swashbuckling.
I thought that, I agree. When he swung down on that flag, there wasn't a whole lot of swashbuckling going on. I mean, there's a couple times when we're swinging on the vines, but as far as Robin Hood himself, that was really the only swashbuckling bit I saw from him. But it was pretty cool how he ran across the rooftops. I mean, it certainly wasn't Errol Flynn, but when he grabbed hold of that rope or that flag and swung down, that was kind of cool.
Yeah, I have the same pick. There were moments here and there throughout the film. The merry men do come swinging in. There's one nice moment where I think it's Robin jumps up and grabs somebody who leaps from one horse onto another. That's pretty good. Yeah. Overall, the most notable was the one early on in Nottingham when they're fighting some tax collectors. He's running on the roofs. He swings on the rope attached to a flag. That bit was pretty solid, felt swashbuckly.
I do feel the final fight was weak, but not terrible. It dragged just a little and could have dealt with better choreography. But there was scenes where you definitely saw that it was the main actor and the main, and the guy who played the Count of Flanders, and they were in that scene and they were fighting, and they were having a little bit back and forth. There's definitely some parts where no, it's not them, or they're doing the whole stupidity of filming the actor reacting to something, but you're not seeing the person he's actually fighting. But the last part of it, where Robin just has his dagger and the Count of Flanders has his sword and everything, I thought that was actually not bad. It definitely was not as strong as the final fight in Adventures of Robin Hood, it definitely had its problems, and there's some parts where it's like, it's this contest of strength. I'm like, okay, that's just boring. Nobody cares about that. But it wasn't a terrible fight. Like, it wasn't offensively bad. It just was kind of weak. The actor sold the death, that kind of surprise of, oh crap, you just stabbed me in the gut and I'm gonna die now.
I was going to save it for low points, but since you brought it up, one of my low points was that final duel, and I don't disagree with anything you just said. It wasn't terrible, it wasn't offensive. The final duel in the Bandit of Sherwood Forest felt really bad because it was so obviously a stuntman in the place of the villain, where this did at least seem like the actor who played the Count of Flanders was doing at least a fair amount of the sword fight. If it wasn't him, it was at least covered up better. But it was so dry. And what I wrote down for my notes was banterless duel. They never say a word to one another.
Nothing.
And there's no personal animosity with our characters. This is our big climactic moment, and these characters have barely interacted. There's very little personal in between them. I don't need a zippy one-liner kill shot like we would get in 80s action movies, but just anything.
Yeah.
But they don't say a single word at any point during that whole fight.
Like I said, it was weak, but not terrible. Like it was one of those things that if we'd had, because I think, let's see, the times that these two characters had actually talked to one another, Robin was in disguise and selling pigeons. I don't think they actually talked to one another. I think Flanders was in the room when he was brought before King John, but didn't say anything to him. I mean, so it's meant to be this big climactic fight, but honestly, it would have been the problem is that Robin doesn't interact with any of the villains except in one scene, really, in the whole movie, and there's no basis for banter. This guy has no real reason to have any personal animosity against Robin per se. He's not English nobility, so he just goes back to Flanders and, oh look, he has his title and his lands, whatever.
He's technically a romantic rival, but I don't think he even knows that.
Yeah, you know. I will say, the sword fight on a certain level doesn't even make any sense, because why is he even doing it? Like I said, it's not a terrible fight. It's just weakened by all of this other stuff. Because it's like, he could have just said, I'm a foreign nobleman. I don't have anything to do with it. I don't even like these guys. And what are the barons going to do to him?
Yeah, there was no reason for him to be putting his life on the line like that.
There were no stakes to that fight whatsoever.
No.
No stakes. Aside from him wanting to bang Marianne.
Let's move on from that banterless duel to the next question, which is, what was the wittiest bit of banter? And this one was hard because, well, not only was that duel banterless, there wasn't a lot of banter throughout the movie. There was not a lot of good lines.
I have to disagree. I thought the Merry Men had some really good lines, especially Friar Tuck during the fight scene when he knocked the guy over the head and said, "Heaven forgive me," and then he looks over at the beautiful woman in the window and kind of gives her the once over and looks at heaven again and says, "Heaven forgive me." I actually laughed out loud at that scene.
That was my one laugh. That was the one thing I wrote down also. So I agree with you there. That was my pick as well, but I didn't have a lot of other candidates.
Yeah, there really wasn't a whole lot of other. It surprised me that Robin didn't have any good one-liners at all. I mean, he had nothing. So it was all the Merry Men, and that was mostly Friar Tuck. Alan Hale had a couple of funny lines, and Will Scarlet did, but Friar Tuck ran away with this one.
I would have watched this movie if they'd cut Robin out and
right.
about the Merry Men getting back together.
Yeah.
That would have actually, I think, been a stronger movie because, man, the actors they had for the Merry Men, yeah, they pulled it off, especially Friar Tuck and Alan Hale and Will Scarlet. They had some banter between one another, but it was, honestly, it did. It almost felt too familiar because they kind of feel like these people who have inside jokes and you don't quite get one or two of them.
Yeah.
Right.
the scene where they rescue Will Scarlet from the pillory, they're teasing him for being locked up for poaching chickens and ducks, and then Friar Tuck is egging him on about egging him on about wanting. Oh, you got a duck left over for me? Like, no, they caught me when I was eating the last one. Ha ha ha! And they laugh. And it's not funny as jokes go. It's charming in the way that the actors sell it. Like, they're really bantering with one another and they're giving each other grief. It's not great, funny lines, but it works in that way that you were just describing, Rick, as it felt like they had this kind of established relationship with each other already.
Yeah, this movie, it almost feels like you're coming in and you're watching the sequel without having watched the first movie.
Right.
But only with the case of these characters. Because they don't feel like they have a rapport with Robin. Like, even Little John kind of does.
Little John does a bit.
But the rest of them don't feel like they even really know this kid. You know? It's a weird dynamic. And like I said, that part is enjoyable, but it's a weird dynamic to have encased in this movie. And it almost, if it weren't for the fact that they are woven throughout the plot of the movie and occurring in multiple scenes, they almost feel like cameos, like walk-ons of, you're supposed to know these characters and these maybe even specifically these actors in these characters. So of course you expect this kind of zingy banter because they're from some other movie that you've seen with them. But it's like,
I actually looked up in IMDb while we were watching it to see if any of those actors had acted as merry men together before. And they had.
Not. No, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, it is a credit to the actors that they really made it feel natural.
They did. They elevated the script with in those scenes.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed. Yeah. Some good camaraderie, if not witty banter, at least. On that topic, though, next question is, who wins the Merriest Man Award? This is the character, aside from Robin, or in this case, Robin Jr., who you would most want as a member of your outlaw gang, and why?
Friar Tuck would win this one for me simply because he was the most boisterous. I think Alan Hale would be able to pull in the chicks to the party, but I think Friar Tuck would be a lot of fun to have around.
Yeah, I would probably pick Friar Tuck as well. I almost want to give it to Marianne just because she did a lot. I almost do. But the other thing I will say is they had Alan Hale doing stuff too. And they had, they did spread it out a little bit. But overall, like, strongest merry man, I'd go for Friar Tuck probably. I was wondering if it was going to be possibly Little John, because Little John does start off fairly strong with some stuff.
Literally strong, throws a barrel at some guards.
Yeah, throws a barrel. Well, no, but like,
he doesn't bend iron bars in this movie like he did in 1922.
Well, but to be fair, those iron bars were not standard iron bars. They looked they looked a little sci-fi. Like, just a smidge. Like,
it was a weird design for him.
It was a weird design, like a central pillar with these kind of ribs, literally looking kind of like ribs coming off.
Very spiked ribs.
I mentioned this while we were watching. I think this is more lines than Alan Hale had in definitely in the Errol Flynn movie, but quite possibly if you count his talk cards and everything in the Douglas Fairbanks movie, even put together, I think he had more lines in this movie.
Probably, and he was there throughout the entire movie, beginning to end. He might have had the first line in the film, or one of the very first lines, because we see him right off the bat being Robin Hood Jr.'s squire at a tournament, which kind of harkened back again to when he was the Earl of Huntington's squire in the Douglas Fairbanks movie. And then he has the last line of the movie where he says, "It's all done. There's nothing more to say."
I love that line. That was a great line. What said is said, what's done is done. Let's go. They did.
It was a very meta line, and I enjoyed it. It's not he didn't have the first line because that whole little sequence where they're explaining the little caps and everything.
You're right. There was the earlier scene where the duplicitness of King John was getting exposed for us.
But yeah, no, that was a good. That was, I will say, of ending lines, that one was very kind of Chaucerian a little bit in that way, that appropriate meta line, or Shakespearean in that appropriate meta line to finish something, to say that it's.
Let's not ascribe Shakespeare to this movie already.
Oh no, I'm not. I'm saying that's what they were going for, and in this case, I felt it worked. Like it did
At that last moment, at least.
Right.
It was certainly one of the most clever lines in the script. I almost picked Friar Tuck also. He's definitely the most fun and boisterous of the Merry Men. He was so eager and ready to run off and join them again when they were doing their getting the band back together sequence, which was great. And I also thought about Lady Marianne for the reasons we discussed before. The actress just kind of didn't have enough presence. There wasn't anything that was really like fun or interesting about her. She was clever and reasonable, but also, I don't know, just kind of there. She felt lacking in some ways.
I feel like they should, if they'd given that actress, maybe if she'd had better lines, I feel like the actress herself might have been able to do it. But
my pick, though, is going to be Little John. He had a strong presence throughout, was really contributing, but also, in particular, for the stuff that we didn't see. It was established how he and Robin Jr. had gone off to the Crusades together. Yeah. How all of the other Merry Men, after the events of the original Robin Hood's exploits, had all gone their separate ways. But the implication is that Little John is the one who stuck around, who kept hanging out with Robin Hood until he passed, and then was fulfilling a similar role with Robin Hood Jr. there. That he had been a presence in the main character's life throughout his existence before the film started, and then was there at the end saying, "What's done's done, it's all over," is why I would pick him, but I can't fault the choice of Friar Tuck. And Friar Tuck has been the runner-up, I think, every other time before now. So Alan Hale already did get the honor of being the very first selection for Merriest Man, and it's time that Friar Tuck finally got his due.
I won't disagree with Little John as a choice. Like I said, I almost picked him. And it's interesting because now that you mention it, I mentioned it before, there's these little things. There's these little things like that. That kind of is a callback to the Douglas Fairbanks. Just like when we were watching, and Robin goes in disguise, they're mimicking the costume from the archery contest.
From the Errol Flynn movie?
From the Errol Flynn movie. There's these little callbacks to the previous incarnations that they're there, and I think they're meant to be a little tongue-in-cheek. Because Little John, as we mentioned in the Douglas Fairbanks movie, he goes off to the Crusades with Robin, and hijinks ensue and everything. So I'm wondering if that's in there intentionally.
All right. Friar Tuck, though, he wins it. And also, I liked his hat. He had a great churchman's hat.
Great hat. Yeah. He had a great hat.
Next question. How robbed were the rich? On a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being Robin Hood and the Merry Men being ineffectual, doing nothing to essentially help the poor and downtrodden, and a 10 being they're giving it their all, they're going to instill democratic socialism for the people of medieval England. Where does
Bernie Sanders with a bow?
Bernie Sanders with the bow, as we put it. Where does Robin Hood Jr. fall on the scale?
I gave this one a 9. I thought that they were fighting literally for democracy. I mean, as ahistorical and anachronistic as that is, they were fighting for social justice, the rights of women and all that stuff. And they did take a lot of money from the rich. They never really showed them distributing it to the poor, but they were definitely fighting for the poor and for the downtrodden. So, yeah, I thought this one was a 9.
I gave it about a 9. I was somewhere in that range, because 9.5. Because literally, he rides up to tax collectors like yoink, just takes a big couple bags of gold, and he assaults soldiers who are arresting peasants who couldn't afford taxes, and he's I mean, honestly, like, especially given the last two movies where you really didn't feel it that much, I genuinely felt that this guy was a champion of the poor and a champion of the downtrodden. You know, like we said, like Andy said, we didn't really see him distributing it so much, but there's kind of that implication. He doesn't seem to be hanging on to it. And by, of course, robbing the rich here, we really mean just tax collectors.
Yeah.
King's
we don't
tax collectors.
ever get scenes with him like robbing corrupt barons or wealthy merchants, anything along those lines. It's really directed at tax collectors, but they do it a lot. The secret messages that they're getting from Lady Marianne are even like where the tax collectors are going to be. The whole fight sequence that we mentioned where he's running off of rooftops is based on him trying to kick tax collectors out of Nottingham. And then we have a whole montage of sequences that are about them foiling tax collections. And then, like Andy said, their ultimate goal being to put these curbs on the monarchy and create some sort of, in quotation marks, democratic reform that is, in theory, based around helping people who are being exploited. I'm giving it maybe like 8.5, bordering up on a 9, just because we don't actually see that redistribution of wealth and we don't see churchmen, because this is a time when the church is, of course, being incredibly flagrant with its wealth. And one of the common elements you get in Robin Hood ballads is the robbing of corrupt churchmen. But we are presented with two church people, really. There's a scene where Friar Tuck is hanging out with some other people in his abbey, but then we also get the Archbishop of Canterbury. But the Archbishop of Canterbury is unambiguously a good guy trying to champion the rights of the poor. We're not getting a, well, are you doing anything to distribute wealth, Mr. Wealthy Archbishop?
I was going to say that anybody with any knowledge of the church at the time is like, what? Because yeah, we know, the church doesn't live off of passing the collection plate. Yeah.
As in terms of like robbing the rich, I'm gonna have to ding it a point or two, but still a very strong showing, because they really showed it sticking to the tax collectors, sticking it to King John in particular.
One thing I would like to put in there is this one did not lean on the whole Saxon-Norman divide, which was refreshing to not have that in there, because it always felt a little weird.
There was a little bit of a mention. There was a little bit of alluding to like, the English peasantry as opposed to the French noblemen.
Yeah,
but it was not a strong through line by any.
It's not a strong through line. Yeah, I mean it's they're focusing primarily on this idea. I mean, God, I don't want to go into all the issues with King's direct taxation on peasantry, which wasn't a thing because feudalism worked by tiers. But the other thing is that there's none of the whole there's this corrupt baron or anything. No, it's because Robin's trying to work with the barons the whole movie. He's robbing from the tax collectors, but they're all the king's tax collectors, which normally you'd have local tax collectors, but whatever.
Hence why the sheriff of Nottingham is usually a particular villain.
Yeah, well, because it's the way that feudalism works is the king taxes the lords tax the people. Normally the medieval structure is, yes, it rolls downhill like that. So this idea that the king is directly taxing the entire peasantry of England is a little like, where would he even get the manpower to do that? Plus the barons would really, really resent that.
Which they did. Hence they haul him off to Runnymede.
Well, except for that's never brought up by the barons as a thing. Like, they're upset about stuff. There's that whole meeting with the Archbishop of Canterbury and the barons where they're listing their grievances, none of which are, he is double taxing our people.
Right.
Because that's essentially what he would
there
be
was
doing.
There was one mentioned by a baron of the taxes. I think I remember that.
Yeah, but it wasn't this idea that they were collecting taxes and then John was collecting taxes.
Right.
If he were directly taxing the peasantry, that's how it would have ended up being. And the barons would be upset by that because they're like, we're already collecting taxes.
Mm-hmm.
If you collect more, we're just going to have a whole bunch of dead people. That's not cool.
One scene where there's a wagon full of people being carted off to prison because they couldn't pay their taxes, and the guard says, well, you'll just rot in prison until you can come up with the money to pay your taxes.
Like, do you know how prison works? Because that's not how prison works.
While there was some strength to the plot that we mentioned earlier in terms of working towards the real historical event of the signing of the Magna Carta, a lot of the rest of the actual plot development to display why it needed to happen, that was not conveyed so well.
This is one of the weaknesses of the villains, is that they are cartoonishly evil in this plan. There's parts of their plans that make sense. And that's where I get into the sophistication of their plot.
Mm-hmm. The stuff with like trying to get the Flemish mercenaries and all.
Yeah, then you get to things like this, where it's like, you really haven't thought this part through. Maybe you should kind of clock it back, take a day to sleep on it, and then come back with your next version of this thesis. Because, yeah, you just, like, I mean, there's literally this, you know, the one scene with the blacksmith where the guy who's trying to get him to pay taxes is like, oh, you have a secret hoard of gold. You all do. I know that. Where would you get that idea? He's a village blacksmith in the middle of Boo-Foo, England. We're like,
and then we're going to
on a gold mine,
burn your hands so you cannot engage in your trade anymore.
Yeah, and then how's he going to pay taxes?
Yeah, the script really could have used a fixer, somebody to really come in, point out some of these flaws, and then punch up the dialogue a little.
Yeah,
that's really kind of what it needed more than anything.
Yeah.
Andy, do you have any other low points for the film?
John Derek, he's no Errol Flynn. He was dull and had no charisma. And we've said that, you know, that has a lot to do with the script, but he I don't know. I don't want to say he's a bad actor because, you know, in the Westerns he was in and stuff like that, he wasn't terrible. But in this particular movie, he like I said earlier, I mean, how many Robin Hood movies have Robin Hood being the dullest character in the whole movie?
Mm-hmm.
That was that, and the fight scenes in general were really bad. They just look like you mentioned earlier, they were just kind of limp. You know, the guys in the background were just kind of pretending, just going through the motions, and even the sword fighting. I mean, John Derek could not fight with a sword to save his life. So
he was more believable with the dagger than
he was. Yes,
that's true. Yeah, we gave some credit to our best swashbuckling action moment being the fight scene at the beginning where he's running on the rooftops and swinging from a rope. During that scene, we also have Alan Hale as Little John fighting off several men, and that is incredibly unbelievable.
Yeah.
Alan Hale is not doing too great for his age there and is pretty slowly swinging that sword, and by golly, those stuntmen are doing their best to make it look like he's putting up a solid fight, but it is not realistic that he is fighting off 3 people at once.
Yeah.
I mean, bless him, he was trying. And 57, if he's having liver troubles, you know, he's probably doing his best. But, oof.
Yeah.
Not one of the strong points.
Any other qualities, good or bad, that you wanted to touch on? I thought the soundtrack was pretty decent, kind of jaunty at the beginning, at least to open with. Then it very much faded into the background, and I didn't kind of think about it again.
There was parts where it seemed like they kind of spent their money on some parts and not others. Like the last scene and the jousting scene were actually quite lavishly done. I thought those were both really quite well done, and they both had that kind of painting quality Andy mentioned, especially the last scene, but you know, even the jousting scene really had kind of this painting quality. The costumes in this movie I thought were quite good. Yep. I really thought they were well done. They looked good. They were not recycled. Well, most of them were not recycled. You know, obviously the guards' outfits were recycled from Pioneer Sherwood, but most of the actual noble clothes were not recycles from previous Robin Hood movies. Now, whether they probably were recycles from other movies, but they worked. You know, they were nice. They fit the actors well, and they looked good on camera. There's some nice looking embroidery on a lot lot of them some really good brocade done on stuff, and I thought whoever was doing the costuming did a good job.
I thought a not insignificant part of the budget went towards that secret door.
Yeah.
That was pretty impressive.
Yeah.
I like that. I thought that you brought this up, the Archbishop of Canterbury. I thought that was very unique and different to see a church guy being one of the good guys and fighting on the side of Robin Hood. And I think that we touched on this earlier, that the politics. Most Robin Hood movies feel kind of small in that it's all about Nottingham and the Sheriff of Nottingham and Robin Hood. Yeah, Prince John is usually a player, but it all centers around just the Nottingham area. This one felt bigger because you had the other barons involved. You had the Magna Carta there at the end. Felt like the stakes were a little bit higher than your typical Robin Hood movie. So I thought that was worth noting.
And yeah, I mean, with this kind of sort of Damocles of these Flemish troops,
yeah,
potentially coming. That was, yeah. I mean, it did. It felt it was trying to reach for this larger plot. Whether it really got there, it's another kind of question. I feel like they were definitely reaching for it. They were, and it did feel that at times, definitely. But it felt like they were driving toward Magna Carta. Like that was that end goal. And I'm gonna compare this to another movie that did that, where they're like, okay, we have this thing that we want to have be the climax of the movie, and we're gonna write a plot to get there. And the movie I'm gonna pull for that is Charge of the Light Brigade, where it's like we have this thing that we want to have be the climax of the movie. Let's write a plot to get there. It kind of felt a little bit like that, where they were coming up with reasons for why that would be the climax of the movie.
Rick, as a writer, I can say that that's how most stories are written.
Oh, absolutely. I get that. I've done a little bit of fiction writing myself, and nothing I would ever share with anyone. But I mean, it is that. It is that. But it didn't feel especially forced, but it was there. Like like there was no sudden left turns into that.
No twists.
No twists. but yeah, I mean, obviously when you're writing you have an end point in mind, but
not if you're J.J. Abrams.
Not if you're J.J.
Right.
Abrams.
That's a whole different podcast.
Or George R.R. Martin, I think. I would almost say that they shot the last scene first and were like, okay, let's get to that. Go there. So, but it's not terrible. Honestly, this movie, like we said, it drags a little bit. The script is a little bit weak, but it's not bad. It's not a bad movie.
I think that does get to one of the reasons why I found it so boring, because it is such a straight road of a film.
Yeah.
There are no twists. And a twist doesn't need to be, an M. Night Shyamalan, everything you thought turns out to be different. No, even if you look at something like the earlier Robin Hood films, like the Douglas Fairbanks or the Errol Flynn film, an event will occur that might have been unexpected, and the characters need to react to it in a particular way that they hadn't been expecting that they would need to do. Like when Much the Miller's son has to go and try to save King Richard from being assassinated when Robin Hood doesn't even know Richard is in England. Or when in the Douglas Fairbanks movie where he thinks Maid Marian is dead, there can be unexpected things that are at least unexpected for the characters that they have to react to. And this movie had none of those.
Right.
And I think that's one of the reasons why I found it dull.
There's basically at no point do you feel any stakes in this movie. Nothing is ever at risk.
Right. Yeah, you never feel like the characters are in any sort of danger at all.
Well, or even in danger of failing their overall mission. For instance, there's never any real doubt that he's going to get the barons on his side. There's this confrontation in the woods where he tries to warn them that King John's totally going to murder them, and they're like, yeah, whatever. Get out of here before we arrest you and drag you in front of the king. But there's no real stakes there.
There could have been stakes if we had known who those barons were, if they had been established characters beforehand, because two of them die and one of them is left for dead. but they weren't characters to us. We never see them until that moment right before they get killed.
Yep.
Well, and they don't seem to actually harbor any real animosity towards Robin, nor do they reveal that they even met him or anything. Like I said, there's no stakes there. It's part of the reason that the fight at the end, it's not a terrible fight, but it's weak because it's so flat. Because there's no stakes in that fight, other than there's this guy who wants to directly murder you. But that's not. But a guy who could have easily just walked away from this whole situation, and wants to kill you. Why?
Well,
I don't know.
And then our stakes are bringing equal rights and democracy to the peasantry of England in year 1215. All right. Any last thoughts, gentlemen?
Like you said, it was a movie, and we watched it, and that's. I guess it's not as bad as some of them you watched, but I won't rewatch this one anytime soon.
I feel no need to rewatch this movie whatsoever. I don't hate it, and I don't feel like I wasted this time, but
right.
Yeah, I didn't walk out of the movie theater, as it were.
You mean
not
your
going
basement.
to movie theaters? COVID's still a thing. Andy, before we head out, do you want to let people know where they can find some of your work?
Oh, good golly! Yeah, I'm a pulp fiction and adventure fiction writer. If you look me up on I know you don't want this said, but if you look me up on a large internet bookseller by my name, Andy Fix, Fix, you'll see some of the books that I've written for various publishers. I'm mostly short fiction, so I'm involved with a lot of anthologies. So yeah, that would be the best way to find me. If you want to email me any questions or anything like that, I'm at andyfixwriter@gmail.com.
All right. And this isn't the only time you've done some media reviewing on a podcast.
This is true. I am actually part of the Babylon 5 Reviews podcast with Van Allen Plexico. So if you're a Babylon 5 fan, I know it doesn't necessarily cross over with Robin Hood fans, but if you are a sci-fi fan or a Babylon 5 fan, we are doing an episode-by-episode review of the Babylon 5 series. We just wrapped up season 1, and we're starting season 2 right now. So now's a good time to jump on board. Check us out at Babylon 5 Reviews.
I mean, I'm a fan of both Robin Hood and Babylon 5, so I figure there have to be others out there.
And we will have to get you on board our podcast at some point, too.
That would be fun.
I enjoy Babylon 5. It was such a good series. And even the 5th season has its highlights.
All right.
But man, that 4th season. Man, that 4th season is so good.
Hitting on all cylinders there. Well, I think I've got to run because I've got children I need to put to bed.
Same.
Thank you so much.
I've got a dog.
Thank you for inviting me, Thad. I really thoroughly enjoyed hanging out and watch the movie with you guys, and it's always fun to chat Robin Hood with people. So I appreciate the invite.
Have a good night, guys. Thanks again.
All right. See ya.
My thanks again to Richard Hopkins-Lutz and Andy Fix for joining me in the Greenwood to discuss our second Child of Robin Hood film. A notion that studios will return to again a couple more times. And to be frank, I hope at some point to see that theme actually get explored. In The Bandit of Sherwood Forest, young Robert, played by Cornell Wilde, arrives in Nottingham to help his father as Robin Hood does the equivalent of coming out of retirement to return to Sherwood and resist the power-hungry schemes of the regent. Robert and Robin have very few scenes together, and Robert never especially talks about his father or his upbringing, while his mother gets no mention whatsoever. We all agreed that it would have been a stronger and more interesting film if it had just been about that older Robin and his reunited merrymen. The film we watched for this episode, with the somewhat similar title of Rogues of Sherwood Forest, came out just 4 years after the other film, and from the same production company. As mentioned earlier, the Rogues of Sherwood Forest even recycled enough footage from The Bandit of Sherwood Forest to require that John Derrick borrow Cornell Wilde's wardrobe. This time, though, Robin Hood was dead before the film starts, so we get even less regarding the relationship between father and son. Again, the son never talks about his father. And sure, it would have been cliché and potentially tiresome to have the son bemoan living up to the deeds of his famous father, but the absence of any sort of regard for their relationship or his upbringing just feels like it undercuts any point in having the primary protagonist be Robin Hood's child. Of course, yet again, there's not a single word spared about his mother. Even more than the other film, they could have done the exact same story, but with an older Robin, and it probably would have been a better film. We will at least get to see a version of the story focusing on an older Robin reuniting with the Merry Men, and Marion for that matter, a little ways down the road when we get to Robin and Marion, starring Sean Connery and Audrey Hepburn. And hopefully, a more considered take on the notion of the child of Robin Hood at some point. Into the Greenwood is produced and edited by me, Thaddeus Papke. Our theme music is by Plastic 3, and it is made possible through the support of our listeners. For as little as $1 an episode, and access to various reward tiers, you can help us out by going to patreon.com/intogreenwood. If you like the idea of offering a tip after enjoying an episode, but don't want to commit to a recurring donation, you can also offer us a virtual cup of coffee by going to ko-fi.com/intogreenwood. That's ko-fi.com/intogreenwood. Anything you can offer is greatly appreciated, and 90% of it goes directly towards improving the podcast and paying our hosting fees. The remaining 10% goes to our selected charity of Trees, Water, and People, which is a top-rated international charity using sustainable practices to help provide clean water and other necessities to impoverished communities around the world. If you can't contribute financially, we fully understand. But if you take just a few moments to give us a positive rating or review on your podcatcher app, or share a link on social media, that would be appreciated even more, because it will help others to find the show as well. If you want to tell us what you'd like to see from a story focusing on the child of Robin Hood, or want to gab about any other aspect regarding life beneath the boughs of Sherwood Forest, you can find Into the Greenwood on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, all with the handle @intogreenwood, or email us directly via intogreenwood@gmail.com. Thank you for joining us in the Greenwood once again.
We should have a game of something.
Yes, agreed.
Maybe Robin Hood.
There you go.
Or Babylon 5. I could go either way.
I've definitely been wanting to run a Robin Hood RPG at some point.
Seriously, he's talked about it like so much.
It's true.